office. Thank you. We will be discussing today the recent enactment of California Senate Bill 826. It is the first law of its kind in the nation. And however you may feel about the law, whether it survives any legal challenge, there's no denying that it has had an immediate impact. It has raised the national discussion on the need for diverse boards, gender diverse and other diversity. And I think more importantly, it has provided visibility to women and girls into a leadership role that they may not have ever heard of or imagined for themselves. And so today we are really lucky to have the nation's experts on corporate governance, board diversity, and board readiness. And to my left, I'm very honored to have here Betsy Berkheimer-Creder, who is the National CEO of 2020 Women on Boards. And if you were lucky enough to get here early, you got a copy of her book, The Board Game, which gives steps for women who want to become ready to become directors. To Betsy's left is Amy Barnard-Bond, who is a coach to boards and other leaders, and also in a former life, she practiced law with me. So welcome to Amy. And to Amy's left is Aisha Mastani, who is portfolio manager at CalSTRS, which is the largest teachers' retirement fund in the nation. And so Aisha has been involved for many years trying to encourage the companies that she invests in to diversify their boards. So we have a broad range of experience with us today on this issue. Now, I'd like to start with Betsy, first of all, because Betsy is very knowledgeable about the law and how it came into being and can provide us a historical overview of why this law came about and why did people think it was necessary.
Thank you very much, Chris, and I'm so glad to be here and be at Reed Smith and see so many new friends and longtime friends, John Eno for one, and Ray Cardozo in the back. So how did it get started? It was started 7 years ago, and as you know, it takes 7 years to have an overnight success. Which is what people, when it came about, people thought, well, of course, how brilliant. Why didn't anybody think of it before? Well, we've been thinking about it for a long time, and it started with a conversation with several women, friends of mine who are business owners, and we said what you in the law business say, there ought to be a law. And of course, we thought, well, why can't there be a law? Because in 2003, the country of Norway passed the first ever mandate requiring 40% women directors on the boards in Norway, and they've pretty much reached that goal. And the companies didn't fall off the cliff, and some of the CEOs were a little bit unhappy at the beginning, like most are, until they realized, well, this is not so bad having women on the boards. And all for the same reason in Norway as well as here, that the research from Credit Suisse, from McKinsey, from other credible independent sources shows that when women are on the boards, companies are more profitable and more productive. So investors, of course, have gotten way ahead of this bandwagon, and CalSTRS has been fantastic as a supporter of the effort to get more women on boards because it's better for the shareholders and the investors. It just makes perfect sense. So the first go-around was to find out who would be the sponsor of the bill. The sponsor is a nonprofit organization, the National Association of Women Business Owners of California, which is 10 chapters in California. It's a 501c6, and like any chamber, they're allowed to initiate legislation and lobby for the legislation. Whereas 2020 Women on Boards, that I'm the CEO of now, is a 501c3, a charitable foundation, and cannot lobby or initiate legislation. But I'm kind of in both camps, I guess. And so the National Association of Women Business Owners, and I'm on the statewide board, have been for many years, and past president, we met with several of the women senators in the state of California to find out there ought to be a law. Why can't we in California do this? And this was 2011. 2011. And then realizing and looking at what it takes to make a law. I have no idea how to make a law. I wrote it, but I didn't know how to make it, and I didn't know how to write it either. So it just shows that, a total amateur can start things and get things done. And it just started to roll. But Senator Hannah Beth Jackson, who then became the author, she's a senator from Santa Barbara. Some of you may know her, very, very much an activist. So she championed the idea. She brought other women legislators together and said, let's do this. But we all found out that in order to have a law, you probably already know this very well, you have to have a resolution first. And the resolution had to be passed by both Senate and Assembly, just like a bill, but a resolution has no teeth, no enforcement, no fines. And so in 2013, the resolution was passed by both houses in the state, saying that there should be, that we urge public companies to have at least one, but maybe 3 women on their boards. Deadline was December of 2016, and nothing happened appreciably at all. No one really cared. And that's the general attitude. Of course, CEOs don't want to be told what to do. But then in 2017, when the deadline had passed and nothing happened, we started to work on developing the law. That's what happens. The resolution is the warning shot over the bow, and then you work on a real law which has teeth. So the teeth is a $100,000 fine for the companies that do not comply, and the requirement is that by the end of 2019, every public company in California has to have at least one, just at least one. And right now, 1/4 of all public companies in the state don't have any, and the other 1/4 only has one. So one woman on their board. But we're after those that don't have any, and that means 105 seats or more, but 105 seats on Russell 3000 companies in the state will have at least one board member by the end of next year. 105 new seats, added seats, and this is a key too. We're not taking away a seat from a guy, heaven forbid. But we're adding a seat, which is I must say, a brilliant solution, so the guys don't say, look, they're not giving up their seat. And I'll get to this why later, but it's all about the money. They're not going to give up their seat. But we can add a seat for a woman. So you may as well pay the woman the $100,000 that she might earn or more for her board compensation, or pay a fine. So it's perfectly logical. And we got it passed step by brutal step, through 6 committees, 3 of them in the Assembly and 3 of them in the Senate, and then the governor's signature. And Amy was with me all the way through, and we testified in Sacramento, and Aisha was very much aware of all that we were doing and how we were out there pounding the pavement, literally, visiting legislators' offices in their districts, writing letters, getting legions of people to write letters. This is no easy task to get a law done. Boy, I didn't know what I was getting into. I still would have done it had I known, but I just am very proud. And finally, after it passed the Senate in May and then the Assembly in August, then we were waiting on pins and needles because the governor had 30 days to sign the bill, and he didn't sign. And we knew he was getting pressure from the California Chamber not to sign it. And finally, in the end, he did on the last possible day, at the last possible minute, on September 30th. So if you may have heard, there were a lot of women, especially women business owners, standing up and jumping up and down and cheering. And that's how it happened. Long answer to a short question.
I love it. No, it's great. What do you think got Governor Brown to sign finally?
Probably his wife.
See, because I've heard it was the Kavanaugh hearings.
It could have been that, because he in his letter signing the bill, he also copied it, sent it to the judiciary of the federal government to say that here in California we take a stand. Of course, he only took a stand the last possible day. But I don't know why. I think it was his wife, and also I know his sister, Kathleen Brown, very well, and I kept her apprised all the way through this whole last year. And she knew about the resolution, too, and she serves on 3 corporate boards herself. In fact, she's featured in my next book that comes out in February that all of you will be able to have. So I think she probably put in some good words like, you're not coming for Thanksgiving dinner until you sign that. But I don't know for sure.
So tell us how many women are projected to be needed for these boards, because the law steps up after a few years, right, and starts requiring more women.
I didn't give you the second part. Sorry. The first part is by the end of 2019, it'll be at least 105 seats. Now, those are the Russell 3000 public companies, but there are more public companies in California that are smaller than the Russell 3000, so it could be another 50 on top of that. It could be 150 additional seats in the year 2019. And that's would be a significant uptick from the current 15.6% of seats are held in the California Russell 3000 companies by women. So the second tranche is by the end of 2021, there have to be 2 more women on the boards, a total of 3 for any board that is larger than 6 people. And that was one of the things that the legislators put in. We were initially saying 3 women had to be on every board, and they said, oh my God, what about the ones that are only 5 members? That would be more than half if we had more, 3 women on those boards. Anyway, it'll be a significant number, almost 700 additional women, board members on California companies by the end of 2021. So it's pretty exciting,
And I know you've probably heard some opposition saying we don't have the pipeline of women ready for board membership. What is your reaction to that statement?
I say, you've got to be kidding. There are, not you, Chris, not you, but every kind of and I say this to all our friends here, it's just a situation, when you're trying to balance out, not invade, but balance out a situation with a group that has been together for years, a collegial group of guys who run a company and make money. They don't want new people on those boards. So the main thing is the pushback that companies don't want to have women on their boards. The boards are very happy the way things are. Investors are not happy with the way things are, and neither are we women. So women deserve to make the money that the guys are making on those boards as well. So the pushback has been, I give you that baseline as the reasoning for the pushback. So every excuse in the world that I have been hearing, there aren't enough women to fill all these positions. Well, there are legions of women executives for the last 3 decades who've been working their way up in the executive ranks to be executive VPs and be in the C-suite and be the head chief human resources officers, the chief legal officers, the general counsels. Women are there in droves, but they're just not. They're just looked over, frankly. And then the other legal arguments we're going to discuss, of course, are pushbacks. But the main one is that there just aren't enough women to be in these positions, which is just ludicrous. And then the one that well, let me not dominate the conversation because I'll have some other anecdotes along the way. It's too much fun.
It's too much fun. So, Amy, you've had a lot of fun testifying, and I'm sure you heard many of these arguments in opposition. But tell us what your testimony, that's interesting just in and of itself that you testified in favor of a law. How does that all go down, and what do you do to prepare, and what did your remarks include? How did it happen?
Gosh, we did a lot of preparation. We also, it's not unlike litigation or other court, you never know how much time you're going to have maybe. And it would depend on the docket and how many bills. So we would try to read the room before we got in. Senator Jackson has quite an active legislative calendar, and so we had to be respectful, I think, of the time we were taking for 826 versus other bills that she was putting forward. So we had to quickly edit sometimes on the fly. But Betsy and I divided up what we were going to talk about. There were a lot of key points that we learned we really had to make consistently. One of the fun things, I think, was I had lobbied years ago, right during law school as a law fellow in D.C., and I had forgotten the gap between the legislature and business expertise. It was a sobering reminder. Some of the questions we would get and comments the first time we testified reminded me of that. So we shored that up. Things like, people thought, oh, you can get promoted into these positions, and why can't, you would get a question, you'd realize, wow, they think you can apply for a board seat, and they're just like posted on, monster.com. So we really kind of stepped through that. And it's not any fault of their own. It's just a lot of people are career government servants, and they have not worked in really large corporations. Their work experience is not around a board. And so we had to really make that clear, because otherwise they're like, what's the big deal? If you don't understand how the process works and how it's a systemic exclusion, it's easy to think, why are they making such a big deal out of this, right? Because we've solved all that. We've got Title VII, we got sexual harassment laws, we've got gender protection laws. Why are you guys here? So we realized that pretty early on, I think, that we really needed to be clear about the behind-the-scenes process.
And so what is some of the opposition that you got when you were in Sacramento?
Oh, gosh, that was fun. Well, the California Chamber of Commerce was the most vocal opponent, and that was interesting. I wouldn't have wanted that role. The main three arguments we got was that the bill was flawed because it wasn't diverse enough. It only included one element of diversity. This bothered me because I felt like it was an attempt to divide our coalition along racial lines. And I also felt that it was disingenuous. I think we all did. We tried to just keep a poker face to be respectful, but the California Chamber would not have supported a bill that gave other seats to other diverse demographics either. And so that one was hard to sit through for 4 committees, I have to say. The critics argued scarcity, that women would be spread too thin and would be overboarded, which is a term for people who overcommit. And then they said that, unqualified women would be appointed to boards, which, unqualified men are appointed to boards every day. Someone at our Fairmont 2020 event said, we will have achieved equality when mediocre women are CEOs. Across the top. That's how we're going to measure that. And it's only slightly joking. I've thought about it, I get a lot of questions, and if a CEO or a board wants to appoint yes people or rubber stamps, they're going to do it anyway. But those of us who know the board process and have robust, thoughtful, intelligent boards that really care about their shareholders and investors and their employees go through a rigorous process. They're not just going to appoint some random woman or man to their board.
Amy, can I
just
comment for a second? Because I think you're right. One of the criticisms that we get sometimes at CalSTRS is, because we've been working on various diversity efforts to increase diversity in corporate boards, is that we focus too much on just gender diversity. And I think you're right. I think one of the things it is somewhat disingenuous, because gender diversity also includes diversity of, race and thought and background and skill sets, all of those things. But one of the things that I always try to also emphasize is that for us at CalSTRS, one, this is something that our beneficiary group cares about a lot. 70% of teachers in California are women. So yes, we're focused on that. But I think the other thing is for publicly traded companies, there's only about 20% female directors. So that gap between females make up 50% of the population, yet they only make up 20% of the board seats, that's a huge gap. Unlike some of the other, I'll just, focus on race, where that gap isn't quite as large. So we're trying to tackle that one first, and then we can get to some of the other things.
But Aisha, let's stay with you. What are some of the efforts that CalSTRS has been engaged in to increase diversity on boards?
Sure. So we take a multifaceted approach. We work with a variety of coalitions just to help sort of increase our voice when we're talking to corporations. One is the 30% Coalition. That's a group of 27 institutional investors from around the country. The other is what we call our Coalition of 6. That includes CalSTRS and 5 other institutional investors from around the globe. But I think the one that's really relevant here is our group called the California Initiative. And that is a partnership that we have with UC Regents and LaSera, and we're engaging California companies that are headquartered in California that don't have any women on their boards, and really trying to make a change there. And I think that one's especially important because in California, we have a lot of biotech, we have a lot of technology down in Silicon Valley, and those are companies and industries where women have been historically underrepresented. And so it just makes for a natural coalition where you have three very large California investors talking to companies that are in their own backyard.
And you're not the only large institutional investor that is undertaking these efforts. There's State Street, BlackRock. I mean, we're talking trillions of dollars of investment that, you know.
No, I think that's a really good point, too, because while CalSTRS has been working on these efforts for a number of years, and we've actually gotten to the point sometimes if companies are unresponsive, we'll actually submit what's called a shareholder proposal and ask for the broader shareholder base to vote on a proposal, usually asking the company to consider diversity as one element when they're looking for new board members. And in years past, they were successful proposals, but I think last year we sort of had a historic win because at Hudson Pacific Properties, the proposal passed with over 80%, which was just, in the shareholder proposal world, that's huge because that means that it was the big investors like State Street and BlackRock and Vanguard that see that there's a problem here and it needs to change.
And I think State Street, correct me if I'm wrong, but they've got a program in place where they're going to vote out the board members that are on nominating committees if they don't meet certain gender diversity requirements.
That's absolutely right. And CalSTRS actually, we updated our principles recently to say that if after engagement we don't see sufficient progress, we're going to be voting against the nominating committees or the whole board in some cases. And I think that you know, we always strive to have engagement first because we understand finding good, qualified directors, it does take time. These things don't happen overnight. I mean, you can make it happen, but they don't happen overnight. So we want to engage with companies first, sort of put them on notice, but it's those companies that are unresponsive or don't seem willing to either expand their boards or fill new board seats, or we see the empty board seats filled with the same white males time after time.
Tell us about nominating committees because they are pretty powerful, right? They pick the future board members. How do they work? And are women trying to get on those committees? And
I think that's an important effort. And I know Betsy can talk more about this, about truly how directors are found and how they're appointed. Our goal right now is just to get women in the door. But I think you're right. I think the next step is going to make sure that these women are in leadership positions, not just on the nominating and governance committees, but on compensation committees, as chair or lead director. I think those are really important places for women to be.
And Betsy, you did tell me a little bit about the process of selecting a director, and it's really interesting. It's not like you bring in 10 candidates and interview them all, sequentially.
That would be fair. Yeah, right.
Tell us how it works in the real world.
In my real world, I've owned a retained executive search firm for 25 years and done quite a number of board searches. Primarily, we're hired for board searches when the company has decided that it wants or needs or must have a woman on the board. More on the must category. And so the way the board search works is that the nominating committee of the board, and those are all directors, sit in, and I know because I've been in the room, and sit around the table and say, the chair says to the guys, and sometimes rarely there's a woman on that committee, but say that we got to get a woman on this board. We don't want a woman, but we got to get one. So who knows one? And that is absolutely the conversation. And I don't mean to be negative. I just mean to be, this is what happens in a social group. So who knows one, is the question that goes around the table, and the guys say, well, my wife's an outstanding executive, but she can't serve on this board where I am. My C-suite women are outstanding executives, but they can't serve on this board where I am. So the women that they really have seen in action and know well enough to endorse for a board position are women they've met on their nonprofit boards. which is why we recommend to women to be on nonprofit boards, but to be very active and to be on the finance committee, and not just on the PR committee where I would have been, but where I was, and then but be in finance and fundraising so that you get seen by these guys who serve on corporate boards, and then you have a chance of being remembered. So that's the way the list gets developed by the nominating committee themselves. And they, for all search firms, whether it's Korn Ferry or Heidrick and Struggles or Spencer Stewart or Burkham or Clayton, that's my firm. The board gives us a list of the 5 to 7 people they already know and trust, mostly men they know through their universities or golf clubs, or through business, whom they know and trust. And trust is a big word here. And then they ask search firms to take the list and vet those candidates. Now, vetting means much more than just looking at what their online presence and image is through all the social media channels, but actually finding out what boards those individuals have served on in the past. What has happened on those boards? Did the CEO get fired on those boards where that person has served? Now you can know where that's going, because the main responsibilities of board members are to, yes, guide the strategic focus of the company, to represent the shareholders on the boards, which is why they shouldn't be people who go native on the board, but should represent the shareholders. And they hire and fire the CEO. And then they handle the CEO's compensation and the compensation of all the senior executives. So it's absolutely logical that the CEO and the senior management want somebody they know on the board who's not going to mess with their compensation. And that's what we women, we haven't known all this stuff because we have been sort of out of those circles. And now that we're in the senior ranks of corporations and presenting to boards in your various capacities and general counsel, CHRO, the more you can get in front of a board and see how things operate is very important for your long-term career. So then, and then I'll close with this, then when we do the vetting and we present the report to the nominating committee, they choose the one who's the favorite and looks pretty good based on all that we found. They already know this person, mind you, and they found out that he or she has not fired somebody on a previous board, fired a CEO. We can't get as deep as how much did they, well, sometimes we do. How much did they increase the compensation of the CEO? But that doesn't seem to be a main criteria. But so they choose the one whom they want to interview, and they bring that person in. If the interview goes well and anybody who didn't know that person gets to know that person, that's the only interview they'll do. They don't bring in 3. Let's get a woman in the mix, get in 3 and or more, and decide who's the best. This is it. That person is selected, nominated, comes to the board meetings. It may be 9 months before the annual meeting happens, and there's the approval by the proxy statements. And that's what we were so shocked by when we heard Bob Hertzberg and other senators and say from the it was like the Kavanaugh hearing. We were down in the pit, and all these guys were up there on the panel. There were some women, thankfully. But even Hertzberg, whose wife served for a time on the General Motors board, he said, well, the directors are nominated and elected by the shareholders. We said, no, they are not. They're nominated by the nominating committee. The nominating committee and the board decides whom they want. The board votes on whom they want to bring in. They bring that person in. Then it's a fait accompli by the time the directors get to vote on it. So, and there's no nominating, as you said. There's no long slate, and let's choose the best one. That's how it really works, from the inside out.
Interesting.
They run uncontested. It's not like an election where you're, voting against you, and you decide who I want from the best candidate. It's a slate, and there's that many seats, and so you just, you can decide that you want to vote against certain directors, but there's not an alternative candidate for you to choose from.
You're talking about the shareholders.
For the shareholders, yes.
And I can add some nuance from having been the executive in charge of the nominating and succession planning and compensation for a recent board at a bank. I had served an interim HR role as Chief Human Resources Officer recently, and so it was great. Did a whole compensation study for the CEO and board and executive team, and then succession planning. And this company was a thoughtful company. The chairwoman of the board was in place, and we already had one other woman on the board. And they look long term. They have a pool of about 10 candidates that they track. And I love the way that we did it. They had a matrix around what are the different industries that we're involved in that are consumers. And literally it was a grid, just like you might put together on a talent team, or when you're approaching any project, who do you want to have on the team? What kind of skill sets do you need? What technical requirements? What's the strategic plan of the business? That kind of thing. And so those were all mapped out, and interest was cultivated over years. So the great thing about that is, people were potentially being considered that may not have even known they were being considered. They're known in the community. They had standing. They were in C-suite roles in other companies that would not present a conflict of interest. That's important. And your book, I think, goes into some nice detail around how do you set up a target list and having, a top 20, what would make sense, what's your value add to the board, and we may want to get into that later. But they did a nice job, and also with racial diversity, geographic diversity, expansion opportunities. Those were all things they were looking very holistically at each candidate. And yes, ultimately, when a decision was made to make an invitation, which actually just happened because we had a board member who passed away, that person happened to have financial CPA background. So we went back to the list and we said, okay, who has CPA financial? We were ready. It's like succession planning in any large organization. You need to know who are your key people, what's your succession plan, who can you slot in. You don't want to do it last minute.
No, but that's very rare that it's well done like that. The thing that women haven't known is that there's a long line of guys lined up behind every man who serves on a corporate board, whom they play golf with. They've been letting Joe win at golf for years, and they're saying, Joe, when you give up your position, remember me. I got your kid into the university you couldn't get him into. I bought that $5,000 table at your nonprofit event. There's all this quid pro quo going on, and for years. And then at the point where there's finally a retirement or a resignation or an opening on the board, then those guys are looking at the people that they've made promises to. And that's why it's very particularly uncomfortable for them now to have to consider putting a woman on the board who is not in that mix. So it's a little bit disturbing to them. And that's why they say the government cannot force us to do this. Well, if you were doing it on your own, we wouldn't have to, We wouldn't have to. And Aisha's been talking about what CalSTRS has been doing for years, but at this point, now we have a law. And all these other things have built up to this point. And with the timing was perfect. With Kavanaugh, with the Me Too movement, with the great spotlight on how women are treated at work, you can believe if there was no woman on Weinstein's board. There was no woman on Steve Wynn's board. Now there are 4. We know 2 of them. But you can believe that if there were women on the board, not only would some of the shenanigans not be going on. What do you mean we're paying $150,000 to somebody for hush money? Women don't put up with that kind of stuff. And not only that, but the women in organizations can look up to the board and say, hey, there's somebody who looks like me on that board. And that's very encouraging for careers and for employee engagement.
What about lawyers? There's lawyers in the room. Can lawyers serve on boards?
She's one.
I'd say yes, but you need to be more than, like any board member, you need to be more than what you are professionally. So if you're a lawyer, you also need to have strategic thinking. You may need to have international experience, depending on M&A can be helpful. You need to have, I think, gravitas and executive presence. You need to be able to get along with people. I think more often than not, and it feeds into what you've said, Betsy, around, who gets invited. It's that comfort level. The board has to maintain a certain, healthy, equilibrium between getting along and getting business done and challenging and having productive conversation. That requires really strong relationship skills and the ability to duke it out over a really important issue and throw yourself down on the train tracks and then go out for drinks. So it's important. So they're looking for that as well. That's why I think many boards don't let you know even if they're considering you. They'll take you out to lunch. It's just, do I like this person? Can I argue with them? And at the end of the day, give them a hug when we finish those 2 days of intense board meetings. So I'd say that that's what I love about board service actually, is that it enables you to grow as a professional, and everyone in this room can leverage amazing expertise and business expertise, and you probably need something more, I would say.
And I was just going to add that matrix that you're talking about, this is something that we as shareholders and investors, we look to companies. It doesn't necessarily need to be in a matrix format, but we're looking for some type of what are the skill sets that line up with your long-term strategy as a company, and who are the people that fill those skill sets. And today, a lot of, especially large companies, most of them have age limits. Instead, and what we're trying to do is encourage companies to have a robust refreshment process, because it's a changing world. Companies are becoming more global. Technology moves faster. We were talking about on our call, there's a lot of companies that need people that, what I call digital natives. They grew up in this world. And as people retire and are no longer sort of actively in the workforce, their value add to what they bring to a board, that diminishes over time. And companies that are really thoughtful about the board adding value to the strategic plan going forward realize that and recognize that, and aren't using the age limits as an artificial mechanism to change over the board. There are some times when someone's skill set is no longer required. And I think that has to be a discussion nowadays that happens up front, whether it's for men or for women. It's not a lifelong gig. It's about what you bring and what value you add to the board.
But for years, men have thought of it as a lifetime appointment. Right, but it is not. And to your point, 15 years is sort of an understandable, accepted time that should be your tenure on the board, because after the 15 years you go native, and you're certainly not going to mess with the CEO's compensation, or can't go out to drinks,
What about term limits? Has anybody thought of putting a term limit on the board service?
There are a few companies out there that have done term limits, and it's sort of back to what I was saying, especially in the technology industry, where you have seen appointments where people are a lot younger than normal. I think the average age right now, I think, is 65-ish, something in that range. And there's a few tech companies that said, okay, well, if we're going to bring someone on that's in their 40s, well, we better make sure we have some type of term limit, because that person could be on our board till they're 75, which is what the typical age limit is right now. But those are still few. I still think they seem to gravitate more towards the age limits.
Here's a really basic question, because I'm learning about this myself now, but why would you want to be a board member? Money? Or, what else?
Well, I'd say one reason that women want to be on the boards is you can make a difference. You make a difference for the company, you make a difference for the workforce, and women tend to bring up things like, why should we just simply close that factory for 3,000, put 3,000 families out of work, and just to make the money that we could maybe make a different way. Women do have that ability to bring consensus and to make a difference. The next book that comes out in February is about how women directors make a difference. And interesting, I thought that I would be able to get brilliant stories out of women and have them, say how they've made a difference proudly, it was impossible, because there were great stories that I knew about. I said, well, what part did you play? I knew she ran the whole thing and brought up the idea, but she can't take credit for it, or else she'll be ostracized by the other members of the board. Oh, yeah, they'll read the story or hear about it and say, oh, that was your idea all by yourself, huh? And so it's very, as we women in business know, you have to be, and men too, you have to be a team player. You can't say that I was the one responsible for a brilliant move, at least publicly. So it was very difficult, but that's what the next book focuses on. And then, of course, the reason that the guys I mentioned don't want to give up the money is because it could be on a private company, $50,000 to $150,000 for a private company board. Now, we're talking about public companies. It's the only ones that we can require by the government to have more women on their boards, and those compensations could range from $80,000 to $100,000 to $150,000 to $250,000.
The average board salary or compensation is $250,000. That's the average. I mean, there are some that are upwards, multiples of that. And most men on boards, and some women, sit on multiple boards. So it could be 2, 3, and you show up, you have a few, board meetings, a couple days here and there. You have a board book that you have to prepare, but it's a pretty good gig. That most people don't want to give up.
Plus the social esteem, the business esteem, the travel, the places that you go in the country, in the world for board meetings. You've had this experience.
So I think you all are talking about the cream of the crop. I'm more familiar with boards that are smaller and more modest and that represent, I think, the vast majority. So when you first said that, is it the money? I said, no, it's not. And my instant reaction was absolutely not. You don't do it just for the money. The boards that I'm aware of are more around $50,000 a year plus some stock, and that's tied to, and you often actually have to buy in. You have to put potentially 6 figures of your own money in to be on the board in a smaller company to show you're aligned, or you get some of your compensation in stock, which is as it should be. If you look at governance failures and things like that, if I have any business ethics friends in the audience, which is another near and dear to my heart, it's important for the board to be aligned and have their own pocket hit if they're not managing the company properly. And a lot of companies, have very modest places they go. I know one board that I presented to last week had its first offsite. They always met in the office. They'd never, ever gone anywhere, and they just went to a nice, hotel 20 minutes away. So I just don't want everybody to think, because I think you see the glamour and all that stuff, but many, many, many more companies are quite modest, actually.
Most of us are never going to be on the board of General Motors or big companies, but we can be on smaller company boards, help them grow, and then be on your first board that might be a small private company, and then move into a small public company, and then be on a board. One good avenue is a board to be on private equity controlled portfolio companies, where you get on as an investor or be representing the investor, and then when it goes IPO, then you stay on the board. A lot of women have gotten in that way, but there are different ways to get in.
And I'll just add, so I'm actually on the board of the Golden One Credit Union, it's a nonprofit, and I actually do it voluntarily, but I do it because our customers and the credit union is a big credit union. It's a $10 billion credit union. It's bigger than a lot of some, local banks. But I do it because I think I represent what our customers are like. I still have a home loan, and I have a car loan, and I use our mobile banking products. So I think it's important that you have people on the board that represent not just the employees, but your customers, and that board, represents that demographic.
And what skills of yours have you found most useful in serving as a board member?
Well, I can tell you, I've learned so much from being on the board, because I also chair the compensation committee. And if anyone knows what I do at CalSTRS, a lot of work I do is on executive compensation. And now I sit on the other side of it and trying to understand that challenge, and at the same time not having equity, because that's an easy way to sort of tie executives. So I have to find other unique ways to make sure that our CEO is focused on long-term strategic goals. And so that I've learned a lot from that. I also think that collegialness, I don't know if that's a word, is an important thing, because we've had some discussions where it's been a very close vote, but at the end of the day, even if you're on the other side of the vote, you have to get behind the decision that's made as a board as a whole. And I think that's an important one, being able to debate the issue, but then understand that the board has to make those decisions together, and that has to be what's represented to the employees, to the companies, to the customers, all of that.
That was an interesting thing we found out when we did the hearings with the legislature. They said, well, doesn't a board have to be an odd number like government commissions so that you always have a certain group that says yes and you have a tiebreaker? No, that's not the way the board works. The board is consensus driven and you have a lot of discussion and everybody comes to a unanimous decision. Otherwise, that person, if there is a person who isn't, not going along, I don't mean that, but doesn't contribute and is an outlier, he or she pretty much gone pretty quick. But it doesn't work like the government.
So, Amy, I heard you at an event recently, and you said this law we're all talking about and some businesses are unhappy about is almost irrelevant. And I'd like to explore that comment a little bit more and ask you what you meant by that.
Well, I didn't quite say it was irrelevant. That's good, because Betsy was ready to kill me. Thanks, Chris.
Almost irrelevant? You said irrelevant.
No, I said that it was likely to face significant legal challenges and that didn't matter, that the challenges didn't matter, because the purpose of the bill, to some extent, had already been achieved, which was to put gender on the agenda. Yeah. We really wanted to change the corporate conversation and challenge and put have a change in process. And, I felt like at the end of the day, being a lawyer, there may be challenges. It'll be interesting to see who's willing to wear the dunce cap to bring the it's not going to be a popular, litigation to bring. And I think it's silly too, because thanks to efforts like Aisha and CalSTRS and State Street, and CalPERS, we know the right thing to do anyway. But that's what I meant, is that to the extent the law gets held up, to the extent it's potentially overturned or an injunction is put in place, I don't think that should stop the efforts we're doing. And so where I've been speaking on this and encouraging and supporting women leaders in my coaching practice or in other places, I didn't want whatever happens, I just feel like it should be background noise at this point. And that may be funny sitting in a room of lawyers saying, well, it doesn't really matter. But for me, this was a statement bill, and that's why I got involved. It was around, there's just a glaring gender gap, 50% across the board, college graduates in the workforce, population, census population, and versus 20%, and much less in non-publicly. There were 70 IPOs in California last year alone. None of them had a woman on their board. And we're in the Bay Area. We like to think that we're pretty, hip and liberal, right? So, do we really even need to talk about it after that?
And about litigation, if there is any, then I want to thank John and Ray Cardozo for being a champion of ours, and Reed Smith. Let me just give a big commercial for and a shout out, because Reed Smith was the only law firm. We went to several to say, would you give us legal opinions, give us National Association of Women Business Owners and our cadre of proponents of this bill to legal arguments to stand on. Reed Smith was the only firm that would give us the arguments and would stand with their name behind it. So I want to give you an applause. So thanks to John and Ray and the many women partners who are here at Reed Smith. I'm so glad about that, because I'm so glad there are many women partners here, because it just feels right. It just feels right. So I also wanted to add about the argument that some of the guys, the naysayers, are saying, besides the legal things, is that, well, women aren't going to want to serve on the board where they're the only woman, and they're going to be called the token. And I say, yes, they are. Yes, they are. And for any woman who feels that she doesn't want to be in this environment and be the only woman, I say you have to take one for the team. You've got to start. Somebody's got to stand up and say, if you get the chance to be on a board, you be on that board, and hold your ground for us. And then because then you open the door for others behind you, and diversity of all colors. So.
No, and I was just, because I'm not sure if everyone understands that most of these companies are incorporated in Delaware. So their argument is, well, you can't apply a California law to a company that's incorporated in Delaware, even though my headquarters are here in California. I could tell you, though, through our California initiative, because initially, CalSTRS was actually neutral on this bill because it didn't affect our portfolio in any way. This was a fine that was coming from the Attorney General's office, and so we were neutral on the bill. There are other bills that sometimes affect us through divestment or other types of things. But now that it is, in fact, a law, it's obviously something that we're bringing up with our California initiative because this is now a financial risk to your company. It's a financial risk, and it could potentially be a reputational risk. So this goes back to who's really going to fight it, and wouldn't you rather, instead of pay that $100,000 fine, either pay it to a qualified woman that would be a value add to your board, or hire a really good recruiting firm, and spend the money there instead of spending it on legal bills or potentially paying the fine.
So speaking of opening the door, Betsy, what have you heard about other states and whether they're going to adopt similar laws?
We're giving other states the template, if you will, what the law said, and in the law we cited Credit Suisse research. It's all the business reasons behind making this step and making law, and all the steps, the hearings, everything that we did, even the gist of the testimony for the judiciary hearings, the banking hearings, and the appropriation hearings, and the letters. We did template letters that we sent out to our friends and said, please send your letter to your legislator. And we're going to send all that. We have a sense that New York's going to be next. Massachusetts would like to be. A lot of women there would like to be, but they've got a governor who is not interested in it. And Texas, I don't think we have a chance. No, I don't. Unfortunately, it should be a pro-business bill because it's pro-business to have women on the boards. But the Republicans have taken this down a rabbit hole that says, you can't tell our companies what to do, and therefore we're gonna say no. And it's a Democrat. It turned out to be then a Democrat issue, unfortunately, because it should be everybody's issue. And it should be really important for business and for the economy. And part of the legal argument is that when California can show that it's not unconstitutional because it's very important to the state of our economy that we have healthy companies, then we have really something to hang our hat on. And so I think many other states will follow, but they're going to be the blue states, not the red states.
So we've got about 10 minutes left, and we've got folks also watching on a webinar, and we'd like to we'd like to open it up to questions from the audience. Katie, do you have a microphone? Yep.
Are there any Texas people on the webinar? Right.
Not sure. Oh, we have a question over here, Katie. Sure. Yeah.
You guys are basically the brains behind this bill. Do you feel any obligation now to solve the problem of getting women on these boards? And if so, what are you doing to make that happen?
Quite a few things.
Yeah. Well, so several years ago, actually, when CalSTRS and CalPERS, we were both promoting diversity. We had a few companies that came back to us and said, okay, well, give us a name. And we're like, oh, goodness. Well, we didn't know. We just wanted you to do it. So we actually came up with we developed what's called the Diverse Director Data Source, and it actually is it's now housed at Equilar, which has what's called their Board Edge, and it's a very unique product where companies can use it to search. You could say, okay, I need a woman who's in biotech that has international experience, and it'll spit out everyone from there. And what was unique about the Diverse Director Data Source was that it was a self-nominating process. And so you can work to sort of make sure your CV so that it has other things and other attributes that would be attractive to a board. So that's one way.
Ed?
Sure. I do coaching, I do leadership development, and then I am doing a lot of speaking in terms of just encouraging women. There's a lot, people are excited now, and it's important to educate about the requirements, and the fact that it is a really significant time commitment and a very serious responsibility. And so not everyone is going to be, qualified to sit on a board. And it can be, a long-term career goal. It can take up to, 5 to 10 years. I have had people who be like, I want to get on. How do I apply? It's like, whoa, wait. So we've had to, it's a nice problem to have, right? That everyone's asking, they're curious about it, and they want to do it. So those are things that I've seen. And then we do board training series. There's some fun stuff that we've been doing with that.
Well, and that's where 2020 Women on Boards picks up, which is a 501c3, as I mentioned, and I'm now the CEO since January, and we do events around the country, huge events. So we had a total of 5,000 people, including John, and many of you will be going next year to the San Francisco event, which had 600 people here, and Amy spoke. Just all on the same day. So we announced the latest research statistics on the same day, which is always the Thursday before Thanksgiving. And next year it's going to be, as Julie already knows, the 21st of November. So write that down. And that's where we feature women and men who serve on corporate boards, and we talk about the techniques that you need, the strategies that you need to develop long term. So it's good to know about this in your 30s and your 40s so that you can get on boards in your 50s and your 60s, because believe it or not, if you're lucky, you will get that old. Not most of the women and the men in this room are quite young, so it's a good time to start. A lot of women tell me around the country, oh, geez, they're already in their 60s. And they're saying, if I'd only known in my 30s. And what you need to know are these 3 keys. Everybody write this down. It's in the book, in several books. It's logical, too. So first of all is your strategic networking with people, men and women, who serve on corporate boards. And this is for men as well as women. Men understand this a lot better than we women do. And men can also meet up with their guys on the golf course or take them to coffee or go to a game. But we women have to take guys who serve on the corporate boards out to coffee or something and ask their counsel, or at cocktail parties, just asking their counsel on how you could maneuver your particular expertise to get on corporate boards. So it's your strategic networking is number one, because as I mentioned, the nominating committee goes around the table. They decide who's going to be reached out to, and if they don't know you, you're not going to be on the list that's given in the search firms. Strategic networking also can include getting to know people at search firms, but they are not going to be calling you unless you're on that list. So there's just the real inside baseball stuff. And then the second is industry visibility. And attorneys can get industry visibility in their area of expertise. Could be global employment law, could be compensation, could be mergers and acquisition. But you need to be speaking, doing speaking engagements, writing blogs, etc. in your area of expertise, so you are known as an industry expert. And then the third is get prior board experience. Nobody wants a newbie on their board for the first time. So how do you get prior board experience when you can't get on a board? You do that through large nonprofits like United Way, American Heart, big Red Cross nonprofits. Get yourself started as a volunteer and work your way up to a board. Get yourself on the industry board that you're a specialist in. And that's pretty easy to do, frankly. You can volunteer, you can get yourself on an industry board without too much difficulty. And another is advisory boards or private company boards. But you got to have board experience. Your board profile and your resume has to show it. And with that visibility, also your LinkedIn profile. Now, everybody says, oh, I don't want to have a LinkedIn profile, or I won't put my picture on the LinkedIn profile. Well, you're not going to be asked to a board. You've got to have a good professional photo, men or women, on your LinkedIn profile, nothing with the little kitty and nothing overlooking the big Sur. You've got to have a professional photo that shows that you're serious, and then talk about all of your board experience, all of the other work that you do in the community, as well as your job. So,
I wanted to add one thing, because I think you bring up a really good point about some of that other expertise, and I think for all the lawyers in the room, one of the things that we're talking, and we being the investors are talking to a lot of companies about now, is not just compensation, but human capital management. So because of all of these things that are coming about, various harassment issues, what does the succession plan look like, how engaged are your employees, these are becoming board issues. So if you have experience in employment law, those types of things, I see that as a growing skill set that boards are definitely going to be looking for.
And what about cybersecurity? I've heard that is another one.
Yeah, no question. I think cybersecurity is another big one. I think making yourself available for some of those industries that historically have been underrepresented. One of the things that we're finding there's a lot of biotech companies, as you can imagine, down in Southern California, that don't have any women on their boards. And for all the reasons that we've talked about here, they say, well, we're having trouble finding one. Well, that's because you go and find other people that look just like you, that go in your circles. And so I think, looking at those industries that have been underrepresented would be a great start.
Any other questions? We've got about a minute left. And we have a reception after, so please come up to the panelists and ask.
Go ahead or sign up for the 2020 website.
Oh, sign up for the 2020 website. I do as she tells me to.
Can we take a webinar question? Do we have time, or do you have any? No? Anyone else? All right.
What are the age limits? Am I too young at 45?
No, absolutely not.
Have you served on a nonprofit board, and have you started to develop your?
Yeah, see?
Good.
Well, and you can, like I said, the diverse director data source, that's a self-nomination process. So you can go to Board Edge and start working on your profile. And some of these other groups like NACD and some of those local will actually, they work with Equilar to make sure that their board-ready candidates are part of the Board Edge platform.
Now, one other thing I could add about lists, though, it's important to be on those lists, especially the 3D list, because the Secretary of State actually is where the enforcement of the SB 826 has now fallen. Attorney General decided he didn't want to do it. That's all right. But you wouldn't have known. It's been very much an inside story. And the reason the Secretary of State has to implement it is nobody else wants to do it. Nobody wants to do this. Can you imagine? And that is tracking each company each year, which 2020 Women on Boards does anyway, but tracking each company to see if they improved and sending them an invoice for a fine if they didn't. So the point that I wanted to add was I totally forgot.
They're sending them to Board Edge.
The list. Yes. Exactly. They're sending them to Board Edge, which is good. So be on the list, but work your magic with your own connections. Because then those connections will say, well, is she on that list? That 3D list? Yeah. But it's just your connections that are going to get you on board. Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Oh.
What happens to how does the money get used, the $100,000 fine? Who gets that money?
The general fund gets the money. The question was, where does the $100,000 fine go? To the general fund. Yeah. Oh, you're right. I forgot to say, the Appropriations Committee tagged on a $500,000, $500,000 price tag on our bill. One reason to do that was to kill it. Another reason to do that was to, and they didn't make it. But another reason was so that whoever was the department that was going to implement it would be able to hire some more staff. I laugh because we can give them all the statistics. We follow it every year to 2020 Women on Boards, but they put $500,000 on it.
Can I make a plug for Betsy's group, 2020 Women on Boards? I went to the annual breakfast a couple of weeks ago. There were 600 women and a sprinkling of men in there. But these are all high-achieving CEOs, board members, women who want to be on boards. And just being in that mix of people was very inspiring. And so I I would advocate for any
That's
lawyer
great.
to join that.
Agreed, and it's not a membership organization. We're simply a campaign, a public awareness and an educational nonprofit, but a public awareness campaign throughout the country. But also we have London and Mexico City now, and we're going to have Hong Kong next year. And so it's becoming global, just like Reed Smith is global. There's method to our madness here.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you to our panelists. And this is the end of the webinar.
I must compliment our moderator because she has organized this so beautifully, and
Thank you.
and really,
I've really learned a lot from these three, so please ask them questions after.
please do. Thank you.
Thank you. And there's wine and food that way.
That's what I really came. Yeah.
Thank you so much.